today, we're going to play with gouache. And gouache is a really, really useful tool. It's, when you buy it at the store, you know, it comes in little tubes like this, usually. Little tubes like this. So it looks very much like you're buying a tube of watercolor. The difference with gouache is that it is more opaque. So opaque means that, well, if something is transparent, if I have a drawing of a duck and I put my transparent paint over it, you still see the duck. Opaque means you cover up the duck. No more duck, right? So things that are in the background, you can cover over things with this gouache. You know, and that's one of the challenges of, say, using gray paper, is that you are now, if you're using transparent watercolor to do the beautiful bright yellow tummy of your bird, that gray shows through because the watercolor is transparent. Enter our friend gouache. So gouache is, it generally, and we'll look at why where it doesn't. It generally behaves a lot like watercolor. So you mix it with watercolor, you clean your brushes with the water, you dilute it just like you would water. But when you get it into a thicker solution, it's going to be really opaque. And there's a few other things that it has up its sleeve, but that ability to add that in is terrific. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to pull out some of my toned paper journals, and I'm going to show you some gouaching that I have done there. And then we'll look at, oh, look, it's gouache. So this is a little gouache sunset. There's all these sort of lovely colors in the sky. And that was painted with gouache, this leaf on toned paper. Look at how bright and vivid those colors are. Well, that's gouache on toned paper. And so you can see that because it's opaque, you're not seeing the gray of the paper through it. This here is a transparent watercolor. So this blue, you're actually seeing a little bit of gray that is through that. So I will use gouache in lots of places where my I'm playing with toned paper. So here's some sky painted in there with gouache, and then putting white on top of it with gouache. And so I can put down something, let it dry, and then come in over the top of that. This very, very bright ladybug here. That little ladybug has a bunch of gouache. Look, gouache, right? There's gouache in these bright yellow yellows right in here. Gouache, 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 gouache. There's a lot of gouache going on here. Gouache going on, you can see in there. This sort of grayish green that you're seeing in here, that's a green painted down with transparent watercolor over paper. And the gouache, and so a little bit of the gray shows through. But this bird's beak and head, those brights that you're seeing on the toned paper, that's all gouache. So if it acts just like watercolor, why? Well, actually, here, this is kind of interesting. So this one right here, this is an apple that is painted with transparent watercolor. And just notice that it is fairly dull, right? It's fairly dull, because what you're seeing on all these here and there is you're seeing the color of the gray paper showing through the transparent watercolor. Gouache, 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 gouache. Ooh, gouache. So gouache allows you to do things like, there's bright waves splashing up here. Some parts of this are transparent watercolor. This was originally painted with transparent watercolor, and this was too. And then I then made a rather diluted solution of the gouache, and I painted that over these distant ones here. And notice how they all look a little bit paler? That's because there's a little bit of a thin layer of gouache on top of them. That gouache is opaque. And so you're seeing that white, making those sort of more pale, distant things. So this started as watercolor here and back here, gouache sky, watercolor ocean, put a layer of gouache over these rocks, put some gouache in a thicker mixture over the water here, and that's gouache in the sky. So let's now take a look. This is notice this sort of rather dull leaf here. This dull leaf is transparent watercolor. So that actually the gray of the paper is showing through, making this sort of a duller gray-green, which I wanted. So if gouache is just so nifty and you can go opaque with it, why not do gouache all the time? The answer is because gouache does a number of really, if you're not expecting it, really annoying things. Here's 3 globs of gouache that I've painted on this piece of paper. And check this out. If I come in here and I am, say, painting this brush has no paint in it, but if I paint over this, look what happens. That was dry. And now it's doing that. So what gouache likes to do is to re-wet and reactivate much more than your regular watercolors do, because you essentially have this little pile of paint that is sitting there on top of your page. That is just like the paint that you might have in a little palette. And if I put my brush into this and I re-wet it, right, all of a sudden I'm painting with that. The same is true if I've got gouache on my page and I re-wet that. Now, I have, I've reactivated that gouache. Another thing, some paints will do this more than others, but I'm just going to put a little bit of paint right out of a tube here. And I'm going to put some paint out of a tube here. And I'm going to put some paint out of a tube here. On these ones here, so look at them, especially on this one here, a little bit on this one and not so much on this one. Can you see that the wet paint that I just put out is darker? So if you look at the color of this paint, it is darker than what you're seeing up here. And so one of the real challenges with gouache is a real drying shift. Dark colors tend to get lighter as they dry, and light colors will often tend to get darker as they dry. Also, they will tend to get a little bit more transparent. So if I, let's say I have some writing here and I cover it up with my paint, all right? So I've got this fairly well covered up. As this dries here, so I'll just put some paint in there. What we're going to do is we're going to watch that, that H that I wrote in there come back. I put a light layer of paint over it, and as it dries, it's going to get, look, see, it's already coming. See that H coming? It's right there in front of us. It's now appearing more. You see the H right in there? Right? And it's going to get more apparent as this dries more. So before we had that masked pretty well, but now look at the H coming out. Isn't that interesting? So I put something down and it looks really opaque. As it dries, as those particles that are in a liquid suspension settle down onto your page, it becomes more transparent. So you've got this reactivation, you've got this, you know, like it's not necessarily what you see is what you get. There's going to be this drying shift. Another problem with it is I have this it put in a kind of a thick mixture here. I'm going to take this page here and I'm going to bend it. And I'm going to bend this page here. Well, this is fairly recently put on there, so it's not really cracking the way that I wanted to do for a dramatic demo. But what will happen with gouache is that it will pile up in a thick pile. And when you go, and will you focus? Yeah. If the paper bends, your paint cracks. And so you can actually get paint chipping off your painting. So if you've piled paint up in thick piles on your page and those pages bend, you are going to get, you'll get things cracking. One last problem with it is that when you, with watercolor, when you put, oh, look at that H now. Look at that, right? Before we take that away. Yeah, it looks like we didn't do anything to kick it back. That is that I put stuff down. As it dries, it becomes more transparent. So you see that H right there. It's back. Right. One last really obnoxious thing that gouache likes to do. So here, this is a watercolor palette. And the watercolor palettes tend to dry in a little cake that you can re-wet. But as gouache dries, it cracks. It shrivels and shrinks, and it cracks. And very often, it will crumble into tiny pieces, and those will flake out of your palette. I'm going to turn myself over to the my gallery view. If you've had an experience with gouache doing that, raise your hand. Right? It drives you nuts. Oh, like I'm going to bring in, hold on, Jack. I am going to add you in the spotlight here. Could you hold that palette up again? Oh, look at those cracks, right? So you've got some that they will also like jump completely out of your palette, right? Yeah, I mean, that just drives you mad. So here, cooperative paint, staying put, gouache, it's crumbling and falling all over the place. So now I think, well, let's just not use gouache at all. But here is, I'm now going to just sort of turn back to Jack Cam. And so I have come up with, so here's my solution to working with gouache. Where I don't need to use gouache, I'm going to use watercolor. Right? It's going to be much more cooperative and nice. And oh, by the way, if you're using gouache and you are what I like to do for my palette that goes out in the field with me is I like to really dry that out. I like to have it dried out. And so how can I not have it crack when it does that? I'm going to show you a few strategies that work for me. But my big thing with gouache is, again, where I can use watercolor, I'm using watercolor. If I don't have to use gouache, I won't. Because with my watercolor, I can put a dark thing down in the back, and once it's dries, it's going to stay put much better than gouache. And I can paint over it. I can glaze over it without having like reactivated, right? And then you've got like this mess that's just appeared on your page. So what I do is for all the dark values, I use watercolor. And I only have a light value gouache palette. Let me hold up my gouache palette again. No darks in there. So where I'm putting down a dark, I don't need gouache. So if I'm putting the dark thing down on gray toned paper, great. That dark is going to, mask out the dark of the gray toned paper. But if I want something to be a really pale value, then I might be reaching for my gouache. So I'm going to be showing you folks how I set up my gouache palette and some things that I do to help it not be as cracked up crazy. I'll walk you folks through. What we're going to be doing is turning this into a palette like this. I recently have changed my kind of color choices. I'm going to be moving some things around, and I'm going to be making a palette very similar to this with a few differences. So let's take a look at some of my color choices for my gouache palette. And even as early as today, my preferences have been sort of changing and swirling around. So here's one general principle. Try to avoid putting carcinogens on your palette. Try to avoid putting poisons that can kill you on your palette. Okay. Where does that show up? The cadmiums. The cadmiums, there are others that have, there are other, toxic heavy metals that we'll see show up in our paint, but if you're going to do one thing, change one thing that is going to make your palette much less toxic, get rid of your cadmium yellows, cadmium oranges, cadmium reds, cadmium this, cadmium that. The cadmium, especially if the pages rub together, part of your paint turns into dust, you can inhale that, you're inhaling cadmium. And I don't know the impact of having cadmium right next to your skin, if it's an absorbed toxin as well. So I have just been removing cadmiums from my palette. And so the nice thing is that the cadmiums did make really bright yellows and oranges and reds. And then they got mixed into a number of other things, like this little palette here, this kind of cool, very useful kind of sunsetty peach color. That is this Holbein Brilliant #1 cadmium. So this one has now, it's here in this palette, but in the one I'm going to be making right now, it's going to be cadmium free. And eventually this little palette right here will be following suit. And I'm just kind of trying to avoid having sort of just a minimum of poison going on in my palette. I then look around the smorgasbord of paints that are out there, and I'm looking for like, ooh, here's a light value one, here's a light value one, here's a light value one. So I want no cadmium, I want light fastness. So that means that it's not going to immediately turn super pale when it gets hit by the sun. And there's a journaler and urban sketcher named Roz Stendhal. And something that she figured out is that the Da Vinci paints, the Da Vinci gouaches, she was having problems with those where she would paint on them, and because there's water that is coming through the page, it would actually, imagine there's stuff painted on both sides of the page. You're painting on this side of the page. You've already painted on this side of the page, so there's some gouache over here on this side. So why do I need two hands for this? I can point with this hand, right? Here's your page, right? So you're painting over here. What she found is that that water would come through the page and reactivate some of this paint, and then it would like, you know, smear over onto the page that's next to it. And so that made for quite a mess in some journals that she was working on. So her advice is she avoids that Da Vinci. Schmincke and M. Graham are a couple of brands that are her favorites. I have been using a lot of Holbein Gouache, and there's a nice color selection, and it seems to be working well for me. So I'm going to be using a lot of Holbein Gouache, but I've also heard good things about Schmincke and M. Graham. But there is a cautionary tale from Laws about the Da Vinci gouache. So just passing that on to all of you. I've got some Da Vinci and I no longer put it in because I don't want to have the same problems that she had. Let's make a palette. There are lots of ways that you can set up a palette that are low cost. This is the Bob Ross Mints Altoid box, the Happy Little Tree Mints. This little Altoids container is a little gouache set. So what I've got here are some half pans, some watercolor half pans. I've painted the inside of this with some white enamel paint. And then I can sort of use this as a little gouache palette. This is particularly nice because it has a picture of Bob Ross on it. Today, what I'm going to be working with is, this is a Winsor Newton Cotsman Pocket Sketchers box case. So Winsor Newton makes these Cotsman watercolor cases, these sort of beginner watercolor sets. A really nice set, and I've got, and it's a good way to start off with your watercolor, but I'm not really using this for watercolor anymore. So I've taken all the little half pans out. There were little half pans in each one of these little things. I've taken those half pans out and I'm going to be using it for my gouache. So I like to not have the half pans in because there's just one more thing to fall out. I'm going to be squeezing gouache directly into these. So find yourself a little case that you would like to use, and it's a good excuse to eat Happy Little Tree Mints. Oh, by the way, kind of another fun way of doing these little kits is there are some packs of gum that come with these little indentations, these little wells in them that are just about the size that fits into these. So another thing that you can do, if there's some information on how to do that on my website as well. You notice that these paints, oh, you just jumped out. I was about to say, are not falling out. Except for you. Oh, by the way, if you're, let's just take a look right now at what to do should your paints fall out. I am going to put some water into the well, right, into the place where it got out, and then I'm going to put this back in, and hold on a second. So I just put it in and I kind of wiggle it around a little bit with my finger like this. And I'm liquefying some of that paint on the bottom of it, and then it will stick in there a little bit better. All right, now let's see if it stays in. Yeah, you guys are staying in. That's good. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm first going to plan my palette. What I want is I want warm colors lining up with this pan here. I want cool colors lining up with this pan here. I want neutral colors lining up with this pan here. So I will be have paints here that I will use up here. I will have paints here that I'll use up here. The ones here go here, the ones here go here. So this will be my blues and greens. These are gonna be my warms, and these ones are gonna be grays and browns. Here's how I'm going to organize this one. What I like to do is I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 wells. So I just plan out with my paints, and I lay them out as I'm going to put them into my palette. So I've got, this is permanent white gouache. I prefer permanent white to zinc white or Chinese white. It's a good little opaque. Here's some Hansa Yellow Light, Hansa Yellow primary gouache. This one is by M. Graham. Then I'm going to move over, and I am going to have some orange and some pink. So why not red? Because if I'm doing red, that's dark enough for things to
Jack, can you move your camera just so we could see the paint?
Oh, yeah.
Here? Thanks.
Let me move this up. All right, and I'll put these down like this. All right. So then here is, let's put my orange yellow like that. So there's some permanent yellow orange. Here is some brilliant pink gouache. Now I'm going to have blues and purples. This is Holbein's Lilac, and this is an Aqua Blue. I'm going to have 2 greens, a leaf green, and a permanent green light. And then I am going to have browns. So this is a yellow ochre, and this is a Schmincke Titanium Gold Ochre. And then I'm going to have 2 grays. These are gray number 1 and gray number 2. And I'm going to put those into here. But I'm going to do a couple of secret squirrel things to make this stick in here better. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to go about that. So if you are trying to open up your tube of paint and you have a hard time with it, a pair of pliers is really nice you're going to save your fingers, and it's also going to be easier on your tubes. So I like to just keep a little pair of pliers. You folks can come over here. And I've got a little secret strategy here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of this into pan number 1 here, down on the bottom of the pan. Just a little glob of, let's raise that up. So there's a little glob on the bottom of that pan. Now, check out secret squirrel here. This is a little bit of roller gauze. And what I'm going to do is cut this into some little square blocks. And what I'm going to do is take this little bit of gauze, and I am going to stick it down into that paint. And what that's going to do is that there's going to be something that, if things do start to crack, that's going to help hold things together inside there. But because there's also stuff on the bottom of it that is going to that will prevent it, that will help it stick. Now, on top of that, I'm going to put in a bunch more gouache. What I do is I put some in, and you'll see how it kind of globs up in a lump. Let's come on down on that. All right, so it's kind of lumpy. You know, if you build your house on mud flats and there's an earthquake, the shaking liquefies the soil, and then that causes your house to collapse. So shaking actually helps things kind of liquefy more. So what I will do very often is I'll put my paint down, and then I will get the tip of my thing right down there on the surface, and I'm just going to give it a little bobbly shake. See what I'm just see a little vibration in my hand, and what I'm doing is that is liquefying that paint. And now as I pull away from it, you'll see that it is nicely filled in all those holes. So I've just liquefied all of those edges. Now I'm going to wipe the edge of this so the next time I open it, it won't be impossible to open, and put my cap back on. Just take a little bit of time as you put your caps back on, put them on evenly, not at an angle, and rotate them down. And then you're going to keep your paint good for the next time. So look at that, nice little club there. So the next one is going to be this one, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Can't open it, get my pliers. Little twist, that comes off. I'm going to first put some yellow in the bottom.
Jack, do you mean to put the gauze in for each of them or just the white?
I'm going to put it in for everybody. So this one gets its own little piece of gauze. There it goes. And I push that gauze down into it. And now I put the rest of my paint in, and notice how it's all blobbed up. Now I'm going to liquefy. I get in there and I vibrate this hand, and that little jiggle allows the particles just to move around just like it would in an earthquake. Another way you can do this is just set up your palette if you in an earthquake zone and put it on your table. It's all San Andreas's fault. There we go. Clean enough for me to put my cap back on. And I'm good to go. You're not wanting to go back on, are you? No, you're not. There we go. No. There we go. So I'm not going to sit here and have you watch me put paint in each one of these wells, because that is just about as exciting. Oh, which yellow? That was Hansa Yellow, primary yellow from M. Graham. Another one that you could use just as well is Lemon Yellow by Holbein. So they're both the same color. The names that different companies put on their paint tube, it's a free-for-all, right? You could name these anything you want. But each one of these, each color actually has a code with it. And both of these are, see how this says PY3 on it? And if you look around enough on this, yeah, there it is. It says PY3. Nope, we're not going to get in focus, are we? Can we get in focus? Can we get it? No, well, anyway, they both say PY3. And that's just sort of the name for basically saying that these have exactly the same pigment in them. But this is how I would initially put these in the palette. In addition to that, up in these areas, I'm going to put dabs of white paint into my mixing areas up on the top. That way, if I just want something to be more pale, I can mix into these without getting this white dirty. And I also am going to put a glob of yellow up into there so that when I'm mixing my greens, I can mix into that. And I'm not going to get this yellow dirty. So I always like to have a glob of yellow, especially in my green mixing area. So I've got some bonus little globs out here. If I have a regular palette, so this is my own watercolor palette, I actually have gouache in this. In this. So here is my regular watercolor palette. And hiding inside this, that's gouache. That's some permanent white gouache there. That's a glob of gouache, and that's a glob of gouache. That, by the way, is a glob of yellow, and that's a glob of yellow. But so I will do some gouache mixing in these. And you know what's neat, if I'm just kind of with this minimalist palette here, if I let's say I want to have a light green gouache, I'll take some white from here and maybe mix it with this glob of white. I can come in here and get some green and tint that. I can make my own gouache with other colors by mixing on this little palette right here, mixing colors with that. I tend to do my gouache mixing in here rather than out here so that this area doesn't get chalky. Gouache sometimes tends to make your colors look a little bit more chalky, a little bit less vibrant. A pink that is made by diluting with water will be more vibrant than a pink that is made by mixing with some white gouache. But that's my little kind of gouache land for when I don't have this little palette. Now, at this point, some people have tuned out and they're going to miss this crazy important point. Here's what I find. I put this in here. If I come back to see if this is dry in a few days, I am going to find that this whole business is crazy cracked up and there are pieces that are falling out. So here is the big secret. And I just sort of figured this out by messing around with it, and it works really, really well. To minimize this cracking, what's going to happen is it's going to dry a little bit and it's going to crack a little bit. It's going to dry more. It's going to crack more. It's going to dry more than that. It's going to crack even more than that. And then you've got crumbled pieces everywhere. So what you're going to do is the day that you set it up, you then are going to leave it out and you are going to let it start to dry. And that evening, you're going to come by and take a look at it. And you're going to sort of see like, okay, this one here, it's starting to, they'll dry at different speeds. They'll dry at different speeds. But what you will notice is that, so some of them will start to get a little skin over the top of it as it dries. And what you do is you take your finger and you gently push down on that skin as if, so imagine that this is, here's my visual, like this, oh, actually, this will be the big wad here. Like this is your big wad of material or of drying paint. And what you do is you just get your finger and you're going to lightly push it down as it is drying, it is shrinking. It is, so it was out in a big pan this big, but as it dries, whoop, let's center over that. As it dries, that little pad of paint in the center of it is going to retract away from the walls. But as I push this out, I'm squishing it out back so that it is contacting those walls on either side. So it's part of the water inside of it has gone out, but I'm pushing it back down, squishing it out so that the sides again retouch those walls. If at this point it is still just super wet and goopy and you start to do this and you're just like, oh, all I did is got paint all over my finger, I'm just a little bit too early. So I'll leave that one, but that other one I can do that little pressing with. And then the next morning I get up, first thing, I'm going to go look at this and I'm going to press them again. And I'm just squishing them down and pressing them up so that they're kind of, and what you'll see is like some like goop will sometimes come to out here and it'll like re-goo onto the walls and like, oh yeah, that's good, that's good, right? So you're going to squish it back down. So it's going to start with, these are going to be full pans, but by the time you're done, they are going to, there's going to be less material in them because all that water has gone out. But instead of just letting those cracks form across the surface, every time you are pressing it down, it's making this whole thing a much more homogeneous mass. And so that then as you, and then what's going to happen is you then are going to come back partway through that day. You're going to do the same thing. So as it dries, you're going to get in there and regularly press those down. This trick works so well. You're going to end up with these little guys. There'll be some, when it does its final dry, there'll be some that you'll see like a crack forms in it, right? And some will still pull away from the wall a little bit. But others will be gooped right in there very securely in your little palette. And they're not coming out. They're not falling out. And that little press it down trick is huge. That's my super secret move for making the light value gouache palette. Then I'm going to have a little on the go gouache palette. And what I can do is on our next class, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing some painting with it, where we're going to be putting our darks in, dark values with our watercolor, let that dry, and then we're going to be coming over the top of it with the gouache. You do not need to have every hue in the book in your mini gouache palette. And the reason is that you can tint these with your watercolors. So let's say all I have to do is just say, you know, generally it's kind of a pink. And with my watercolor, with this palette, I will just sort of re-wet this. Re-wet, and I'll paint. And as soon as that is dry, I'm going to be able to paint over that with other watercolor and tint this. Sort of another way of sort of thinking about that is you could paint, like sometimes what I'll do for a sunset is you can either with, you know, the pink or a light orange gouache, I can paint that into part of my sky over something that is blue, let that dry. And then if it has turned a little bit transparent on me, I can then get in there and add another layer. So you'll be able to add layer on layer on layer of gouache. And as long as I don't get it into a really thick pile, I'm not going to really get into that cracking problem. But I could put stuff on even with white gouache and tint that. I could then come by with some watercolor and just turn all that gouache orange by just a little tint of my brush. But we'll be demonstrating some of these moves. So you don't worry, like I only have just a few colors here. It's going to be okay. One color that I do want to point out here that is particularly cool is gray number 2. And you might wonder, why is gray number 2? That's this one right here. Why is gray number 2 doing such a happy dance that it gets special call out? Well, it just so happens that gray number 2 is almost exactly the color of a Strathmore gray sketchbook. Right? So that means if I make something and want to erase it, but I've got it down there with pen, how can I erase? I can paint over it with gray number 2. Can you see the gray number 2 on the page? Yeah, barely. That's some gray number 2 sitting there where I had written in the wrong date, right? And so I put in the wrong date and, or no, actually I had the date over here and I then put the date in over here again. And I realized I don't want the date there, right? I want to be able to erase. So I put in just a little glob of that gray. Let's see if I can find any other places where I was erasing with that gray. This little kind of warning sign, I had one that was really sloppy and it didn't work. And you could see that I just painted over that with a thick mixture and ooh, right? It's roughly the page color and nobody really notices it. And those who do, it's okay. Let's see, where is some more gray number 2? It blends in so well. Oh, you know, here I wrote things wrong, right? I put in the wrong month down here, right? And so I could have erased that, or I could put gray number 2 over the top of it. And I chose to put the gray number 2 over it. Isn't that fun? So you do want yourself some gray number 2. Sure, you might be able to mix that out of other things, but it is, if you've got one of these Strathmore notebooks, there was a glob of stuff that I didn't like here on the page. And I made it disappear. By the way, remember that drawing shift. Don't panic. If you've got one of these Strathmore notebooks and you say, all right, Jack said I can erase with this. And you grab yourself some gray number 2. And you put it down on your page, and it looks too much in your face. You can see it too well. This is actually blending in rather nicely. So there's some gray number 2. So it will do a little bit of a drawing shift. And so actually we'll watch the drawing shift. See, it's drawing around the edges, right? You're seeing the drawing shift with gouache happening. This gray letter C that you see right there, that's the difference between the drier part and the wetter part. So again, you're seeing, so that is gray number 2 from Holbein.
Like, here's a technique question with like a vibrant color like magenta, you know, like a hot pink flower or a vibrant purple flower. How would you recommend getting that if you're using tone paper with what you're doing here?
We will be doing more of that next week, but let's just do that right now because you asked. Aw.
If you have it planned for next week, it's 2 minutes to 1 o'clock, just to give you a time check.
I'm going to put down something here because Carolyn wrote, no, this was from Amelia, right? She wrote, I love you in my journal. So I'm going to make a little heart. I'm going to add a heart on this page. We're going to put that in with this pink, what's called Brilliant Pink.
Can you slide your notebook down just a tad? Thanks.
You want to watch me paint this heart. That's a good heart. And you're thinking, that's not quite the vibrant color that I wanted, right? I want something that's more intense. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry, and actually I'm going to be impatient here. You're going to hear my hair dryer. just so that we can kind of go a little bit faster. So I'm going to hit this with the hairdryer. Is. There's still kind of a pale pink heart, but you want a bold pink heart. So that's where we reach for our magenta, and right here is my quinacridone pink. And I'm going to clean that pink off my brush. Mix myself up some quinacridone pink. And there's some quinacridone pink then painted on top of that other pink that just provided a light value base layer. And I can get all the vibrancy that I want out of that. So I can use the, if I want to make the whole thing, that I can. Now I'm going to make a more diluted mixture of it. You can see that they're sort of lifting up and mixing a little bit. So I can paint on top of gouache, but do remember that when you do that, that gouache likes to reactivate and get back in the game. This is kind of a fun. Here's an Ochre quote I just found from my journal. You know how like you've got a journal page going and you've got a new thing you want to put it in there. He's thinking about a page composition. This was such a great quote that I had to write it down. He says, "As I see new elements, I play Tetris on my page and see how to fit them into the page." I thought that was such a fun idea. Playing Tetris with your composition. So that, dear friends, let's see, where is my, oops, didn't want to do that. Wanted to do this. You can do this. What we're going to do is I want to encourage everybody to, if you're not going to do anything else with it and you're doing some stuff with watercolor, just go out and get yourself a tube of permanent white gouache. Let a glob of that dry in some sort of safe part of your palette, and that will be your kind of gouache dip-in zone. And oh yes, there's a good question. There is a new type of gouache on the market called acrylic gouache. Once acrylic gouache is dry, it does not re-wet. So for nature journalers like us, it's not very useful. It's very useful for studio work because you can put something down and then you can go on top of it and it's not re-wetting. But let's say you were to carefully make one of these palettes with acrylic gouache, you put your brush into it, no pigment is coming back. So don't use the acrylic gouache. We want to use just the regular Oh My Gouache, and then you are in good shape. If it's possible to help support me and my work by making a donation on johnmuirlaws.com, I greatly appreciate that. It goes a long way to helping support me and my family, and every little donation makes a big difference to us. I'm very grateful to my patrons and sponsors who have been helping me out. If at this time it doesn't work to make a donation to support me, I totally understand. These times are economically absolutely crazy. But see if you can pay it forward, either by an act of kindness or stewardship in your community, and make a difference that way. I want to thank everybody for your support and participation, and I hope that this first workshop of how we kind of set up our gouache was a ton of fun for you. Between now and the next time we meet, I want to encourage you to set up your own gouache palette and with light values, and we'll be playing with that in our next class. And so bring that out. We're gonna have a great time. I also want to thank again Ivea and Melinda for being our behind the scenes team and helping just make sure that these nature journal workshops run smoothly and they remain a clean, well-lighted place for learning about nature journaling in a community of joyful people. I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm now going to jump over to the community part of our workshop. And if you'd like to share something, all you have to do is turn on your camera, raise your hand, or hold your journal up to the page.
Hi, everybody. So I just had a quick question. I was going to my art box that I have on my desk, and I found these acrylic tubes, and I was wondering how much do they differ from gouache? Can I kind of also put them in a box and they will kind of turn from liquid to hard paint, or is it different with acrylic?
So this is acrylic. So this isn't the, oh, this just says acrylic on it. So
yes,
acrylic paint, you can dilute it with water, but it actually is a plastic. And when it dries, it is there permanently. So you're not going to be able to re-wet it or move it. And if you take acrylic and you put it into a palette and you let that dry, you might have well has just sort of filled it up with rubber cement. You're not going to be able to re-wet that or do anything with it. So acrylic is great stuff for when you are working in a studio.
Okay.
Working in a studio. And you can put it down, you let it dry, it's staying right there. So it's acting very much like acrylic gouache. Once it's dry, its mind is made up and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, but maybe if you just as you said, for the toned paper, you just usually the birds, like if you take for example the white one and the yellow one and the green one, then you kind of can squish it on your watercolor palette and just take it and do a swab. It's gonna get harder, but you won't be able to use it again, but just to take 3 tubes with you. It will be vivid like gouache.
Yes. It would be vivid. It will be vivid, but it also is now permanently on your palette. So you might bring just the plastic top to a like a little butter dish, that you can clean off. Also, if it dries into your brush, you're not going to be able to get that stuff out of your brush. So I find I have never tried to use acrylic with a water brush. I have done it with just sort of regular paintbrush things. And you just have to make sure that when you're done painting, you're getting in there and you're washing those thoroughly, get all the bristles clean. But I wouldn't put it on your watercolor palette.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and just wanted to do a recommendation. Recently I bought these. It's kind of like a Mark Simmons pen also, but it's not the one that you have on your website. It's from Tombow, and it's very similar. It has, you can also it varies. You can choose when you're buying how hard you want the tip, and also a couple of sizes are there. It's a Tombow Fudeno Suk, something like that. Fudenosuke. Yeah, Mary wrote it in the chat, I think.
Next time I'm in an art supply store, I love testing those sorts of things out.
It's very similar. I tried it side by side with the Mark Simmons pen with the zebra, and it felt very close to that. I just saying because I had to buy the Mark Simmons pen when I ordered it. It had to be shipped all the way from United States, and that's a bit of a problem. So these I could buy in European stores. So
great. Tipton County Museum also has made in a comment that they've tried that pen as well, and they really like it. So what we're talking about here is pens that are really responsive. When you press harder, you get a thicker line. You press more lightly, and you get a thinner line. So it can give you really expressive lines. And we're trying to find ones that give you good line expression and don't wear out too soon. We want one that'll be a sort of a firm enough tip. Is the one you have the firm one or the soft one?
This is just a second. I think it's soft tip.
The soft tip.
Yes, it's soft tip. I also have another one somewhere here, but I think that one was the hard tip.
Which did you like better?
I like the soft tip better. The hard tip has its line thinner. You can make thinner lines with it, but I found that the line variation wasn't as big. You can also make pretty fine lines with this one if you kind of just put it straight, and really fat lines if you press it a bit harder. So there's more variation in line with the soft tip. That's what I found. So
fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that. And
yeah.
Good to see you.
Right, I just wanted to share my silliness. So you said that gouache reactivates when it's wet. So I made a little note. It's now the zombie paint. And drew a little zombie.
Sketch note.
And I was doing the Tetris notes, and I totally love that. So yeah, that's what I'm calling this page. So just wanted to share the silly zombie.
Hold that up again. These are great sketch notes.
Hold on. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what fun. And let's see the little zombie again. Warning, caution. Oh, that is really cute. That is really fun. That's the cutest zombie I have ever seen.
Thanks. Just wanted to be silly with you.
I like it. I like it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Hi. Let's see, am I unmuted? That's usually my...
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, great. So I went out as part of my job on the NOAA ship Reuben Lasker for 21 days. Was able to get some sketching in. Okay. So able to get a little sketching in. Did some memory sketching. That's what these are.
Oh, wait, hold on. Just bring it
Sorry.
back here again for a moment. Oh, these were from memory?
Yeah, these are from memory because I was working too.
Yeah. What was your role on the ship?
So I usually work behind a computer, but I got the chance to go out. And so the ship does acoustic surveys in the daytime, and then at night they pull a net to see what the acoustics were. And so we sort through the samples and weigh and measure stuff and identify it.
Oh, wonderful.
So that's some of the species we found.
Oh, is that one of those deep water? One of those.
Yeah,
deep viper?
it's called a loose jaw. Let's see if I can get the. There we go.
Oh, that's so.
Fortunately, I didn't get a good picture of it, but and then we also saw even up towards the top, we saw some juvenile king of the salmon. That's this one here.
What is that?
It's called a king of the salmon or an oarfish.
Wow, what great diversity. This is cool.
Some different stuff. Yeah, the main species they were interested in were mackerel and sardine and hake. And then there's one of the ones that I was able to set aside and spend a little more time on, one of the squid.
Oh, this just reminds me of those studies by early naturalists. I also like the way you've turned over the claspers to look at the patterns on the. Yeah,
I was trying to get some of the diagnostic features if I could. And then those are lanternfish.
Oh my gosh. I remember seeing an exhibit of these at the California Academy of Sciences, just with these cool bioluminescent pads on their bodies.
Yeah, they were pretty neat. The pads didn't glow except when I was drawing them. The light hit them just right. So then they'd fluoresce so you could see where they were. They don't always look so good in the pictures because they kind of lose their scales in the trawl net. And then I'll show you one more.
A moa.
Yeah, we got some mola molas, some juvenile mola molas. And we were able to release them all alive. Juvenile ones are probably, these guys were maybe 2 to 2.5 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like a wedge. Their bodies are so thick, they still weighed about 20 pounds.
Yeah, there was one of those that they brought into a live tank at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Mm-hmm. And it just had, unlimited opportunities to eat and grow. And even though it was in their largest tank, they realized it was rapidly kind of outgrowing their space. They had to get this giant thing that ended up, taller than I am, out with a helicopter. It was.
Yeah, that probably weighed over 1,000 pounds. They get really big. So.
Yeah. And considered by some people to be plankton. Just sort of, they've got a little bit of directionality that they'll do with their fins, but they mostly like just to kind of hang out with ocean current.
Just that anal and dorsal fin kind of go well like this.
Out on Monterey Bay, we also see those guys lying sometimes just horizontal on the surface. Mm-hmm. Gulls will land on them and pick little crustaceans and things off their bodies.
Yeah, they usually have plenty of those. The other interesting thing I noted was their eyes are super mobile for a fish. Usually fish don't move their eyes that much, but these guys, they could look backwards at you and everything else, and they were looking all around while we had them out of the water.
I'm never going to believe what happened to me today. Could we see that last page one more time, or one that you find particularly interesting? This is just so neat to see this sort of shout out from the research vessel.
Yeah. Well, here's another. Here's one of the target species. There's a anchovy.
Oh, yeah. You really get that because of the way you've handled the shading on that just the sort of the steely look of that. So could you hold that up one more time?
Yeah.
Look at that. Notice that the shadow there along the bottom of the belly doesn't reach all the way to the bottom. And if it had, it would not feel glossy and shiny. But because there's that pale zone right on the bottom of the bottom, you also got to get this sense of just this thing glistening and being really kind of metallically shiny. That's really fun. Thank you so much for sharing that.
One more of the critters. Let's see. I know I did some sketches. I don't have the right book for most of them. We're called pyrosomes.
Not
Probably
familiar.
don't have the right skip. There's well, here's one with an anchovy that's stuck in a pyrosome, which happened a few times. There's big pyrosomes. They're colonial tunicates,
Oh.
and they're pelagic. A tube shaped. Every one of the little bumps is a different organism, and there's thousands of them. They just kind of showed up after the blob of hot water pushed up in 2014, and they're just all over the place. Nobody knows what they're doing or what they're eating or if anybody eats them, or because they were usually further south. But
that's really fun. What a grand adventure. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You bet.
Also, you get points for having the most interesting workshop.
Yeah. Interesting is a kind statement, I think.
It looks like a place that thinking happens. So I love to see that. Thank you so much for sharing those.
Thanks.
So great to see you. So I drew this green turtle from like photos.
I love that angle on the head and the way that you've handled the suggestion of scales going out there on the limb on that flipper. That is, oh, that's really fun. That is really fun. Also, folks, notice the way that those cracks on the flipper kind of wrap around it. That also gives you much more of a sense of the curve of that. Oh, thank you so much for sharing this.
Yeah, I care a lot about weight for some reason. And I'm really happy when I find a really dense fish. And green turtles is one of them. They're like that big. Because I've seen one at the Horniman Museum.
Yeah.
They're up to that big maximum. And they weigh like 130 kg.
Yeah. There was one day when I was working at the California Academy of Sciences. Hold on, I lost you there. I'm going to put you back, spotlight for everyone, and then I'm going to join you. Here, there you go. I was working at the California Academy of Sciences. So there are ecologists and biologists there who work all over the world. And off the Pacific coast, a giant leatherback turtle that had died. They didn't really know why. They wanted to do an autopsy on it. And it was a leatherback. The dimensions were, if you put it on the ground there, it would be like this. It was this enormous leatherback. Now, this thing had died in the ocean, and the gases inside it had started to form as decomposition began to happen inside, and so that it floated to the surface. And that's why somebody found it. And then they loaded it on the back of a flatbed truck, and they brought it over to the Academy of Sciences, where people wanted to do a necropsy. And also, collect the skull and parts of this thing that they're interested in doing. And they thought, let's not take it inside the building because this might have kind of quite a smell to it. And so they, on the back of the flatbed truck, they opened it up and began investigating it, where they discovered that this thing had the most incredibly powerful smell that even some of these hardened necropsy people really had a hard time handling. The other thing they didn't realize is that they had parked their flatbed under the air intake for the entire building. So that smell then just got up and distributed throughout the entire building. We had to evacuate because all of a sudden the whole museum smelled like decomposing leatherback turtle. And that was a good time. That was a good time. So that would have been, I don't know, 99, 2000, somewhere around there probably. That's a good time with the leatherback. So thank you for sharing that picture.
Yeah. So leatherbacks are really heavy, like hundreds of kgs, 400 or 500, and the sunfish, ocean sunfish, that one weighed 1,000 pounds, was it?
I don't know the weight when they finally kind of got it out of there. My guess is that they weighed it, but that was a lot of sunfish. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, they can grow like 4 meters, and they weigh like 2.3 metric tons.
That's a lot of sunfish.
Yes.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we get back to doing things in person, something I want to organize are a few collegiate trips off the coast of California here. And that's one of the species that we'll often be able to see when the weather is right and the ocean temperatures are right. Now let's see, I'm jumping back to the gallery view. Hi there.
Hi, I've listened to you many times, but this is the first time I've ever spoken to you. I have really needed you this past year and a half, and I've been happy to have you all.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to pop back in here and join you alongside in that. Yeah, this community is what got me through COVID.
Me too.
I was starving for, I love people. They're my species, right?
Yeah.
And this community just sort of brought together such positivism and kindness and creativity. It's really been a blessing.
I appreciate it very much.
So
and
everybody who's watching and you're part of this community, thank you all for doing what we have done to take care of each other. We're not out of this yet. We still have to really kind of keep in mind this idea of being of caretaking one another locally, within your family, within your extended community, within your world community, thinking about how we can sort of push the boundaries out of sort of who we decide that we will also try to take care of. Sort of initially we're taking care of ourselves, and then sometimes we can expand that to our just a nuclear family, a small group of people around us. But can we also extend that compassion to the strangers in our community or in our schools? How can we help keep them healthy and take care of them? And what about those lines that are drawn on maps? There are people just like me on the other sides of those lines. And how can we as a world community respond in a way that can try to help each other stay safe? Because we need to, if we are going to get through this, the only way we're going to do that is by doing it together.
That's why I appreciate your world view. I really do. I did want to show you something too. I just started putting gouache on, and I had this one plant in the backyard that only flowers once a year, and it only flowers for 24 hours and then it's gone. So I went out at different times of the day to catch it, but really it only flowered at 1 o'clock in the morning. So I didn't catch it full, but this is what I did see. And I put it on, and because it's a white flower, I put it on the toned paper so that it was
perfect medium for that.
Yeah. And then I've been playing also, I've been doing my usual colored pencil and stuff, but I've been playing with different fonts to put in here to draw.
I like this one with the little dots on the ends of those letters.
Yeah, it's a fun thing.
This is just so playful and joyful and deep observation. And I love that this flower got you up in the middle of the night. You go out and see what happened next. When we get onto a little mystery like this,
Yeah, that's
You know,
right.
our world is expanded by this flower that calls us out in the middle of the night. What's going to get, you know, one of these big Homo sapien primates up out of bed in the middle of the night is curiosity.
Yes.
And you did. That's wonderful.
The other fun thing I have learned and enjoyed is the scientific names for things. I looked them up in an old book of my husband's. He can tell me where the long names break, so I can look up the right part of the word. And they say such funny things, what they really mean in their Latin names. I've enjoyed that a lot too, because I have an art background, no science at all. So
Yes.
This is all like new to me and fun and new.
My dad studied Latin and Greek and just delighted in Latin names and was constantly calling me up and and giving me the etymology of, like son, did you know? Like some of them have these wonderful stories behind them and or some observation. It's really, really, really fun. So I've now inherited a bunch of my dad's guides to scientific terms and things, and it's really fun to look through those. What I used to do is I used to tell my friends that I don't have Jaeger's, a source book of biological names and terms.
You want to write that down?
Source book. Is this a good one?
It's a good one.
What I used to do is I'd tell all my friends that, there's actually a free Latin name hotline that you can call and have the etymology of any Latin name explained. I mean, what I would do is, I would convince my friends that this existed, and then I would call my dad, and he would say hello, and I'd say, I've got a question about a scientific name, and we just sort of kind of hash that out there, and then I try to kind of then say thank you so much. I've got to run now, and then hang up. And the person's like, wow, there really is a Latin name hotline. That's great. Who knew?
Who knew?
Yep, that was my dad.
Nice.
Thank you so much for sharing those. I think you're gonna have fun. We're gonna have one more class on gouache, and just sort of play with this a little bit more and sort of see what this technique is like of playing with the gouache and the light values. What do you currently have in terms of? Do you only have white gouache, or do you have a few other colors?
I have white and some very, very old, almost hard in the tube, different colors that I've been able to get a little bit of color out of. But I'm going to order some fresh paints.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
And also thank you for just sort of acknowledging what this beautiful community that I think it's sort of, it's helped sort of remind me of, the better parts of our nature.
Yes.
During a time that sometimes looked kind of dark, this group helped remind me of what is good about our species.
Yes.
Thank you. Hey there.
Hey there. Thank you. I've mentioned before that I have a son who can sometimes enjoy being outside, but sometimes he can be a little reluctant. And so I've decided to try to start watching the Nature Journal Connection with him once a week. And so yesterday we watched episode 2. And even though I was the one who did the writing, he had brought me home this rock that he found at school. And so we had this fun getting into, asking him what he noticed. And I wound up doing a bit more of the I noticed, but then he had ideas about, like, he was saying, oh, it reminds me of this. And he wasn't even thinking it reminds me of, he just came up with that on his own. And so I was able to write that down. And then he and I kind of had this back and forth on questions. And I'm just really happy that I got to share this moment with him. Thanks to your video, and then also thanks to him being thoughtful enough to bring this rock. So I'm just feeling really optimistic about this, and hopefully right now I'm the one who's doing the writing, but hopefully in time he'll do more of it himself if I model it for him. So that's my hope.
And I think when somebody has a hard time, if the mechanics of writing really slow you down from the thinking, having somebody to help you with that is a wonderful thing. Then you can also both look down and look at all of your observations, and then they're still just reflected, bounced back to you. That's terrific.
And then we can eventually go back and answer our questions if we find them. Plus, he's got a habit of naming things. So he decided to name the rock Robin, of all random things.
Rock and Robin.
Oh, I like that, Rock and Robin. So he's like, this is Robin the Rock. And before that, we'd been watching this one Lily, and I kind of dropped off from it, but he was seeing me try to draw and paint it in here. And so then he got excited and wanted to like keep an eye on it. And so even though we only got to draw it the once, every time after that, he'd say, can we go see if our friend has begun opening up yet? And so then I would try to draw like the little bits of the petals that were opening. And so he got really excited because he wanted to see how they would open over time. And he was so impatient. He didn't know exactly when they were going to open, and he kept on making these guesses. And so it just reminds me that sometimes the best way to get him involved is to do a mystery, or to show him a mystery that neither of us knows the answer to.
Because I loved what also you were saying about of finding something that you're authentically curious about. So much of the way that science used to be taught is kind of this, there's some phenomenon and the teacher already knows the answer, and the teacher doesn't, they did it last year and the year before that and the year before that. So they're not really interested in it. But the idea of kind of running up to the edge of your understanding with your child and then leaning out over that chasm and letting yourself drop into it is, if you can model that sort of authentic inquiry, the world's going to open up.
And also, I think that it also adds something special that we do this together as an activity. In time, he might do this alone, but sometimes for a little while, a person might need another. Well, actually, you were saying this at the very beginning, that it helps to have people to form habits together. And I know that with Logan, our relationship is one of the things he cares about the most in his life. So
lucky to have a mama like you.
Thank you. I'm lucky to have him. And so this, I'm hoping, is something that we can do together. We used to fill out these things about good memories and stuff like that. So I'm hoping to add this as a ritual as well. So, thank you.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, look at this owl.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to bring it into focus. It looks at anyway. This was the owl that was here in Central Park in the city for, oh my gosh, it was here for something like 10 months. I believe Linda spoke about this Barry. He was here and he was killed by a car about a month ago, I think. I don't know. I mean, people were really upset because he brought it, similar to you. He brought people together in the park to look at him because he was there all through the winter, all through the summer, heat wave. He didn't leave. And it was a she owl, and people would go out and photograph and visit the owl, and I would visit the owl. And I was shocked at how upset I was when the owl died. I was really crushed because a lot of people wrote. There was a whole fence of memorials for this owl saying things like, you got me through the pandemic. You got me to leave my apartment. I came out of my apartment to watch you. And I thought, I feel the same way. This owl got me involved in birding, meeting other people, going out, watching, waiting for the owl, watching it fly out at night. And so I feel I had already drawn and painted this owl a bunch of times because I love owls so much. I felt I had to do a memorial. I'm trying to work on this. I'm trying to make it special. Right now, it's a work in progress. It's a little soft in value, but maybe that's what I want. I'm not sure. But anyway, I'm sharing it incomplete. And
fun to see watercolor in progress.
Yeah, I mean, these are going to be autumn leaves. It's a birch tree that called a yellow birch, and so I have to do a little research to remember what they look like in autumn. And that was when I first saw this owl, was in October. So yeah, so it's fun, but it's a tough project. It's challenging. It's not been, it's not easy. I go back and forth with other things.
I love the idea that you've got this this project in honor of this bird that you made such a special relationship with.
Me and so many others. Hundreds of people came. They had a memorial for this owl, and hundreds of people came to it. I mean, it's amazing.
Hey, in honor of Barry the owl, do you think we should do a workshop specifically about drawing barred owls?
Definitely.
All right, I'll get one on the calendar. Hold me to it if I forget.
Okay. They're great. They're
yeah, really fun. Linda is also in on it. Okay.
Yeah, Linda's in on it totally. She's another New Yorker. The thing about this particular owl is they said it was very young, and it related to people, and it would really come down out of the branches, down fairly low, and catch things and bring them back, and it really didn't act like a totally completely wild owl. It was it was wonderful. I mean, they look right at you, and yeah.
Those dark eyes.
Oh, those pools of darkness are amazing. Oh, somebody else is very enthusiastic here. I see about the barred owl workshop. Yes. I see that right there. Anyway, thank you so much for being here and being another phenomenon that's gotten me through the pandemic, besides Barry.
Oh, thank you for being here with us. Again, thank you to this whole community.
You bet.
And Melinda, Anne, yourself, everybody here who's been kind of we're kind of it's so strange that I because we've seen each other so regularly. There's a whole bunch of people who I've never met who I feel just such a kinship with because we've been through this process together.
Right.
You're one of them, Mary. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll set up a class especially for Barry.
Yay.
We'll do that. And
she's got a flycatcher. Oh.
Yeah, so I'm just practicing for the Mountain Meadows, Restore Mountain Meadows hashtag. And I just did this just now. Well, because I wasn't doing the gouache setup, but this is with colored pencils, and I think I'd like to set it more in some willows and show more about the habitat around it. But that's what I was thinking of for, in fact, I got an email from the Truckee River Watershed Council about restoration work that they did with the Truckee Donner Land Trust in Paraso Meadows, which is a great example of build it and they will come, because this was a very badly degraded meadow, thanks to everything from grazing to logging to camping. There were no houses, thank goodness, but they were able to introduce analog beaver dams and get the stream to meander again and bring the water table back up. And the willows grew and the willow flycatchers came back. So very exciting. So I just took their picture from their email, which I think is available on Bird Pixel or one of those, but I'll double check the source. And so I was just playing with that while we were doing this class. And I encourage everybody else to work on get their meadow on.
Yes.
Work on their restored meadows. And we do have a few submissions already. Everything from the carbon cycle to toad, and so it's going to be fun. But this was just my practice sketch.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much for sharing this. It's also the way that little bit of color in the background also just, even though it is not specific, it does give you a sense of context. I'm in woodland, I've got filtered light, I'm in springtime.
Mm-hmm.
Just that, I like the way you've got the pencil lines kind of dancing in both of in different directions. This gives a little bit of texture to that in the background as well. Thank you so much, Aaron.
And Jack, thanks for all you do, getting me through the pandemic as well. I appreciate this whole community.
We're doing this together. We're doing this together. So in just a moment, I'm going to be turning off the shower. The shower? It has really been great to be here with all of you. And thank you all for joining us and playing. And I really look forward to being with you again. I want to encourage you to get your little gouache kit together. It's really fun to play with, and we'll mess around with it and demystify a little bit of that medium. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and let's take care of this beautiful planet that we all share. This is, I think of it as my duty to the future to be the best steward of this that I can. And together, we're so much more effective and powerful at passing forward intact, healthy world to our children, our grandchildren. Also, not just for the human family, for the animal family, the plants, everybody else out there. They've got an intrinsic right to be on a beautiful ball of life, just as we do. And I respect that. So thank you all for being here, and I will see you soon.